Welcome to the verse-by-verse study of the book of Proverbs. We shall begin chapter 23 today. Recall from last week, there's been a shift in the book from the authors and the format of the earlier chapters. But God's wisdom continues, and he continues with a very specific set of themes throughout this book. As a reminder, this book contains 850 proverbs, but there are actually only about 30 reoccurring topics for daily life, for daily living. These topics include a range: anger, parenting, contentment, our financing, discipline, diligence, honesty, and then everything from envy to greed, health to marriage, forgiveness to sexual immorality, and lastly, speech. There's so much covered in the topic of speech. And lastly, work. Again, Proverbs are God's practical advice, his guidance for day-to-day life, and how to avoid those unnecessary headaches and heartaches, and instructions on how to have an abundant life. Let's take a look, beginning in chapter 23, verse 1, which begins with this topic of discernment. When you sit to dine with a ruler, note well what is before you, and put a knife to your throat if you are given to gluttony. Do not crave his delicacies, for that food is deceptive. Deceptive. The key word to understanding this verse is this word deceptive. You have been invited to this major banquet by a powerful ruler. You're likely excited and readily are going to accept his delicacies and gobble those down because they're so enticing. The warning is that we are to put a knife to our own throat, which means we're to exercise our own self-restraint and keep our eyes open and be discerning, because this ruler likely has a hidden agenda. These enticing food, or this opportunity that he's being offered that is so enticing, is likely deceptive, meaning that you are likely to be scammed and or manipulated. So it's saying, do not allow our gluttony, our ego, our awe, overpower our godly common sense wisdom. Next, do not wear yourself out. Wear yourself out to get rich. Do not trust your own cleverness. Cast but a glance at riches, and they are gone, for they will surely sprout wings and fly off to the sky like an eagle. This verse is not saying that we should not pursue and be diligent success. The advice is we should not wear ourselves out in the process. Do not make the pursuit of money our all-consuming first priority, especially at the expense of our health, our family, our reputation, and our relationships, and most important, our peace that comes from that relationship with God. Paul said that the love of money, the consuming pursuit of money, this pursuit of wealth, power, fame, is the typical root of almost all sin. And that comes from a heart of greed, pride, uncaring, and this insatiable anxiety, appetite that robs us of our peace and our contentment and blinds us to all things around us. The proverb says that in the end, all of it is fleeting. When you and I are on our deathbed, we'll be thinking about our wealth or the deals that we made, but rather we're going to be sadly regretting all the relationships that we missed. Next, again, we are warned about who we dine with and who we associate with. Do not eat the food of a begrudging host. Do not crave his delicacies, for he is the kind of person who is always thinking about the cost. He says, eat and drink, he says to you, but his heart is not with you. His heart is not with you. You will vomit up the little you have eaten and will have wasted your compliments. Again, a warning that we're not to be enticed by these offers of delicacies, these deals that are too good to be true. What appears to be a good deal on the surface, the host is verbally saying, enjoy, eat up, drink up. But our godly discernment tells us in his heart he is not with us. In his heart he is not with you. Meaning he is a greedy person and only interested in himself. So therefore, it's very likely he has an ulterior motive. And if we're not careful, again, we'll be fooled by this false charm and flattery and end up regretting attempting to consume these delicacies, these deceptive delicacies, and likely regret the words, the kind words, the positive words we spoke about this person before we truly understood and learned the hard way about his nature and his purpose. Do not speak to fools. Do not speak to fools, for they will scorn your prudent words. Again, who are fools? Fools means that those that reject God and cast scorn on his wisdom. The verse is not saying that we should not engage with the world, but it's rather saying we're not under no obligation to continue to share God's wisdom with those that consistently reject it. Recall Jesus likewise said at the Sermon on the Mount, we are not obligated to give God's pearls, his pearls of wisdom, to pigs. Pigs have no appreciation for pearls. Likewise, hard-hearted fools have no appreciation for God's wisdom. Next, we have a repeated verse about both dishonesty and greed. Do not move an ancient boundary stone or encroach on the fields of the fatherless, for their defender is strong. He will take up their case against you. Recall we mentioned before, boundary stones were used to define property lines between neighbors. This proverb is speaking about someone is trying to take advantage of their neighbor. In this case, a father and husband has apparently died. And rather than helping that neighbor, helping that widow, this person is attempting to steal from her by moving that adjoining boundary stone to expand his fields at her expense. And here we have God's strong warning that this fatherless family has a strong defender in God who will take up their case and be the father to the fatherless. Next, a general encouragement. Apply your heart to instructions. It can also be translated discipline, and your ears to words of knowledge. Recall in Proverbs 7:3, it told us we are to write God's wisdom on the tablets of our hearts, which means we are to move God's wisdom from our head knowledge, which is simply knowing, to our heart, to heart knowledge, which is a result, and heart knowledge becomes doing. As was noted in Jeremiah, it is the heart that drives our motives and therefore our actions. Someone once said the distance from our head to our heart is the true distance to heaven. And that this 18 inches is the most important journey that you and I will ever make. Next, do not withhold, do not deny discipline. Again, this word discipline is the same Hebrew word in the previous verse that was used as instructions. Do not deny instructions or discipline from a child. If you punish them with the rod, they will not die. Punish them with the rod and save them from death. And death here literally means a pit. This word rod implies all forms of instruction or discipline, not just corporal punishment. It simply means that we are to teach our kids, to teach children accountability. They need to know that there is consequences to their decisions, to their behavior. And the verse is warning if the parent or the elder denies this instructions, and instructions that should come from that elder's heart of wisdom and love, as we'll see in the next verse, if we not teach them this accountability, then they will end up in a bottomless pit in life. We will close with these two verses, which are linked to the previous verse. My son, or my daughter, if your heart is wise, then my heart will be glad indeed. My innermost will rejoice when your lips speak what is right. So the verse begins with my son, my daughter. which implies that this is a parent speaking or an elder speaking about teaching. And this elder is giving God's instructions, God's discipline, God's wisdom, teaching this child how to have a wise heart. And how joyful this teacher's heart becomes when that student begins to gain that heart of wisdom. And that manifests itself, that demonstrates itself by what comes from their lips and from their actions. That brings joy to the heart of the teacher and to God. Well, we shall close it there and finish up chapter 23 next week. Until then, may God bless you. Bless you and your family with both grace and peace. Aloha.